You're listening to Harrowsmith Radio. I'm your host, Wayne McPhail. In this episode, we learn about how some burdens, the ones that bring us together in the physical world, can be good burdens. I chat with author Christina Crook about her new book, all about just that. Next up, a beautiful cookbook that centers around the seasons, families, and a kitchen table. We're coming together all the time on this audio outing. By the way, if you want to read Harrowsmith magazine instead of listen to it, you can subscribe to the print version online at harrowsmithmag.com. And you can find Harrowsmith magazine on selected newsstands across Canada. But for now, settle in for the next half hour of Harrowsmith Radio. Christina Crook is an author, workshop leader, and speaker. She's also worried that as a species, we fail to thrive if we don't connect. If we do not take on, as the title of her new book suggests, good burdens. Those are the tasks that bring us together, not isolate and divide us the way Crook thinks social media does. I talked to her about good burdens and connections. Here's our conversation. Hey, Christina, thanks very much for joining us. I wanted to start the interview with a quote that's sort of late in your book, and you quote philosopher Albert Bergman, and he says, "Joy gives life its splendor, burdens give life its grounding." And when I read that, it really struck me that that was sort of an excellent summary for your book. Can you take that apart a bit for us?
I discovered this quote from Albert near the end of the writing of this book, which is why it appears where it does. And I completely agree that it's a perfect summary of good burdens. How I would unpack that is when you ask people what brings them most joy in life, they are things of splendor, their experiences in nature, their relationships with people, their big project, something they've made. Those are the things that really bring us alive. And burdens give us the grounding. Well, burdens are those things that we set our hearts and minds to that bring meaning into our lives. So a relationship we've committed to, a community that we've decided to serve. So I think they go hand in hand, is I think what Albert is getting to in that quote.
When you use burden, and you talk about this in the book, that I think the connotation most people have about a burden is it's a burden. It's something, it's a trial. It's something that you're carrying on your back. But you're viewing it in this case as things that you willfully take on that fulfill you.
That's right. The big promise of technology, right, is that will free us from every burden. The big promise of big technology is that things are going to be more convenient, right? Quicker, we can control more. But the things that actually bring most joy to our life are often burdensome things, the things that I referred to before, right? Really investing ourselves into a relationship or to a project. So an amazing discovery I made in writing the book was doing a word study on burden. And actually one of the definitions of burden is capacity. It's actually the capacity of a ship. And I loved that metaphor of actually burdens sort of expanding us, making us more through the process.
And I want to come back to that metaphor of the ship because you really build on that metaphor really solidly throughout the book. And it is a profound metaphor that you use to talk about life and moving through life as a ship would move through water. So let's come back to that in a minute. But I want to just go back to your previous book because you wrote Joy of Missing Out. And that was a guide to sort of stepping away from distant and uncreative technology. So what prompted you to write this book, given that you had taken a look at the impact of technology in the previous book?
When I first discovered good burdens, this is a concept that actually comes from philosopher Albert Borkman in his 1984 book, Technology and the Shape of Contemporary Life. I was captivated by this idea, and I thought it was really the culmination of what I was trying to communicate in the joy of missing out. So I define the joy of missing out as the joy of missing out on the right things. And to come full circle, we miss out on those things to make space for good burdens, to make space for the things we're really meant to invest our time and attention on. So it is a follow-up to the joy of missing out, but it is still very much a standalone, a lot of the same themes. But I think the joy of missing out really was about disconnecting from the internet. And Good Burdens does talk about the ways that the happiest people, the people that are happiest with technology use it in very distinct ways. And they actually use it for community, creativity, and care. So in Good Burdens, I'm not saying just check out of the internet. I'm saying if you're going to be there, and of course you're going to be there, then use it intentionally in these three specific ways.
In your previous book, you're really critical of the fear of missing out. You sort of frame it as sort of the evil love child of modern technology and modern economic systems. Can you expand on that a bit?
I mean, it's a perfect storm, right? Is the capitalism and then on the internet. Advertising was always designed to give us FOMO, the fear of missing out, right? Instilling in us a desire to want what they want us to want, wanting what other people have in many cases. And so FOMO, right? FOMO and JOMO is a play on FOMO, right?
Yes.
The joys that we can have that when we step away from that constant pull towards wanting. There's a book that I would recommend to everyone called Stand Out of Our Light by James Williams that is about the attention economy and this specific area that you're addressing right now in terms of how capitalism and the internet work together. And he says that the biggest problem is that it prevents us from wanting what we want to want. That is the biggest challenge that we're facing in these digital spaces. And so that's what I mean when I'm saying that FOMO is really the great enemy of the age.
Yeah, and in your book, you say, that the core message of FOMO is I'm not doing enough, I don't have enough, I'm not enough, and that the antidote to that is joy.
It's a level of contentment that is almost untouchable. And I think that is what many of us discover when we slow down and really stop altogether. There's someone, I don't know where the quote comes from, but someone is speaking about the internet and they say, nothing is that important, just lie down. Just stop for a second, right? Just stop, right? And nothing is that important. And so that's what I mean when I say that joy is the antithesis of it, is stopping long enough to be present in a moment, taking stock of the goodness in your life.
As I was just finishing your book, I was also starting to hear about the Facebook papers, all of the documents that have been released about Facebook, and their unwillingness, the company's unwillingness to address the very things you're talking about that are making people unhappy, that are driving people towards the periphery, to the extremes of viewpoints, and exacerbating their anxiousness, right? That's the stuff that engages and drives engagement. And that's what Facebook actually wants, as opposed to trying to make people happy. They're trying to create a situation where they're making more money by making more people more unhappy and more extreme.
Yeah. And we see every day now more and more Facebook employees coming forward with these types of stories, these internal documents. And the reality is these big tech companies are free, right? They're free to play. They're free to engage on, but of course they're not free, right? They're mining our data and they are extracting not just our time, but really our lives. What are our lives made of, right? Our time. And so the more time we spend on those platforms, the more ads we see, the more money they make. And so, of course, it is in Facebook's interest to not directly tackle that head on, because that is the core of their business model.
So I want to talk about the opposite of sort of engagement in terms of engaging with people, not in a bad way, but in a good way. Because you talk about in the book, you say that we're suffering from chronic loneliness, and that people are unsatisfied with their friends, unsatisfied with their relationship, if they have any friends, and if they have any relationships. And some people have like one long-term friend, you point out. Mm-hmm. So what do you think is at the root of that dissatisfaction?
I think that for most of us that live in the big city life, you don't have to live in a big city, the pace of our lives have pushed all of the relational aspects right to the margin, not just friendships, but, spouses spending time together, parents with their children. And so it's imperative, right, that we bring those things right back into the center. The study you were talking about comes from the American Sociological Review. And the statistic says that most of us only have one confidant. That's one person, if we're lucky, right, that we can call in times of need. And the question, for me becomes, what is it all for? If we don't have time to invest deeply, at least in a handful of relationships, with whomever they may be, what are we busy with? What is this all for?
So I think some people who are in favor of social media might say, well, look, I've got tons of relationships. I've got thousands of friends on my Facebook page. They like all the stuff that I do. I share my pictures on Instagram, and I've got hundreds of people all over the world who are enjoying my pictures. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with those kinds of relationships? Why don't they count?
They do count, but when it comes, when the rubber meets the road, when you're in a point of crisis, when you have something really truly intimate that you need to share with someone, do you have that person in your life? And if you do, then that's fantastic. And I really do believe that there are different capacities when it comes to managing relationships. There are some people, and I am an expert in this space because all I do all day is talk to people about their relationship with the internet. And there are some people that have an incredible capacity to engage with others online. They just do. They are able to maintain the relationships, in the real world, deep relationship with friends and family, and be able to engage in all of these different platforms. But I would say for the majority of us, we don't have that kind of capacity to manage both. And so I would say to a person that would say that I have all of these friends in all these places, okay, but what is the breadth and depth of those relationships?
So it's sort of like, to use a technology term, it's sort of like some people have more emotional bandwidth than others, right?
Yes, perfectly put.
So I want to talk about attention now, because there's one quote and you quote the poet Mary Oliver in your book, and she says that attention is the beginning of devotion. And when I read that, I really felt a need to sort of really try to understand what that means. And you explained it in the book. I wonder if you can sort of, again, unpack that notion that attention is the beginning of devotion.
So if you think about being attentive. So right now I'm on a video or non-video, an internet call with you doing this interview. But if I look to my side, I can see actually the shadows at play on the wall in my house, and the light is shining through the leaves and they're moving right with the wind. And being attentive to things, really paying attention on a particular thing in a particular moment, allows us to build a devotion to it. And so what are we devoting the majority of our time to? Well, we're devoting the majority of our time to, or being attentive to, right? Most of us are waking hours to the internet. And so that's really what I'm trying to get at in that quote. I mean, Mary Oliver, of course, is the most incredible and beautiful poet and writes at length about this topic in particular. But I think the war we're fighting, right, is the war on our attention. And so the question for me is, what do we want to be devoted to?
Later in the book, you talk about something to be devoted to, which is spending time with people that you love, even if you're not doing anything in particular. And you quote the Dutch word, I think it's Nixon, right, of just sort of hanging out, right, with your pals. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So Nixon is just what you were saying, is the art of being together for no purpose whatsoever. And I just thought, what an incredible idea. The idea of just being with loved ones and not doing anything in particular, each of you doing your own thing, and how much intimacy is required to do that with others, and also how much it begets, like how much it creates when you're able to just lie there or pick up the book or read something aloud to someone, or just do, or do nothing at all. I'm going away this weekend to a yurt with my family to camp. I'm looking forward to Nixon around the fire and the conversations that it spurs. And I think we need those open spaces to allow conversations that are unexpected conversations to emerge from those moments together.
Now, you blame the inability to be present in your own experience on the phone. And I want to talk a little bit about that because, and we talked about it earlier in the conversation, but I just want to revisit it. That, for example, I take a lot of photographs and I share a lot of photographs, and I find the phone a tremendous creative outlet, and I shoot video on the phone. So I'm using it as a creative tool, and a creative tool to create content that I share with others and get feedback from others. So in that sense, that the technology isn't a barrier to creating community or creating experience or being in the moment. It's actually an asset to it. So how do you tease that apart so that you can talk about technology and social media both positively and negatively?
Yeah, so I love that you're using it in that way, and that comes right back to the study that I write about in the book from Dr. Pamela Pavlicek from Pratt University, who studied people and had them track their technology experiences in journals over weeks and months. And what she discovered was that people who are happiest with technology use it for, and I said this earlier, for creativity, care, and community. And so the difference is passive consumption, so being on social media and just passively scrolling, and that dullness and often deadness that people feel, that we tend to feel, versus creating or really intentionally connecting or building community or even caring for someone through those tools and platforms. So it makes sense to me that is a life-giving and energizing way for you to use your technology, because you're using it you're using it to connect, for community, and for creativity.
One of the other things you talk about in the book is the idea of sort of omnipresent extremes, right? That there's extreme fear, there's extreme disease, there's, all sort of extreme weather. Can you talk a little bit about why that resonated for you?
So it was because I had gone to an exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art here in Toronto, and it was about the age of, the extreme self. And it was a compilation of video and audio and visual art. And I found it incredibly compelling to consider all of the ways in which we have pushed and also accepted that we become more and more extreme. I remember when it was so obvious that people had to be so obnoxious on Twitter, right? To get any attention, you have to be quite extreme and obnoxious, right? The clips now on TikTok have to be shorter. They have to be more bold, better produced, cleverer. And of course, on the political front, right, the polarities that are coming into such extreme states of being because of the algorithm. You referred to it earlier with Facebook, in terms of that's what drives engagement and clicks. So that was really what it was about for me. And I think that for most of us, we have an awareness that we don't feel fully ourselves online. And I believe the reality is because we don't fit, right? We can't put all of ourselves on the internet. It's just not possible. We're embodied beings. And so this idea of being extreme online, of having to have an extremely perfect, curated presentation of self, or an extremely, well-edited bio, or to put extreme, opinions on the internet to get likes and attention. I think it's really at odds with the real nature of us as human beings who just want to be loved for who we are, right? Not for what we present of ourselves.
Now, there's a business idea called opportunity cost. If you are going to invest in something or spend time on something, that means that you're not doing something else, right? And you talk about it through James Williams, the author James Williams, where you say, what do you pay when you pay attention? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we talk about paying attention all the time. And maybe you have these moments too, where all of a sudden it's framed in a new way, and it's such an aha moment. I just loved that question from James Williams. What do you pay when you pay attention? And just for some background, James, is a former Google employee, worked there for 10 years, and was part of forming the Time Well Spent movement that went on to create the Social Dilemma documentary and all these different things. What do you pay when you pay attention? Well, you pay, and what he says is you pay, with all of the things you could have been doing, and ultimately you pay with all the lives you could have lived, right? All of those moments and days and months and weeks of our time and attention that could have been spent on learning to play an instrument, or talking to your mom, or pursuing a new career, whatever that might be. So I love that you frame it in terms of opportunity cost, because that's absolutely what we're talking about there.
So I just want to wrap up by coming back to, as I promised we would, the metaphor of the ship as your journey through life, as a ship's journey through water, and the broader metaphor of the ship and the body and all of the burden it carries. Can we just sort of wrap up by just sort of talking a little bit about that?
This picture of a ship was actually shared with me more than 20 years ago by someone who had a dream. They shared this dream with me about a ship, and they shared this dream with me, and they really felt like this dream was for me, to remember that I was the ship and not the lifeboat, to remember that, to really be focused on my purpose in the world and not scurrying around and spending time on doing things that are not meant for me. And so when I was writing this book, this metaphor came back to me. And then, of course, the discovery of burden, meaning capacity. And I got thinking about the capacity of a ship. And of course, a ship, aboard your ship, you only want to carry what is necessary. And of course, you want there to be beauty. It's not that it has to be entirely just functional, but really you only want to carry aboard the people, right? And the things that you want present with you. And of course, you've set a course, and it is difficult to move a ship, quickly. It's not like there's something off to the right and, how we are on the internet where it's like squirrel, like just run off, to one side. You can't do that as a big ship moving through water. And so that's why I thought it was such a perfect metaphor for navigating our relationship with technology. We are the ship. We have set a course for our lives. We get to choose who's aboard. We get to choose what it looks like, and we want to stay the course. And so, yeah, I hope that kind of frames that up for your listeners, but that's what that ship metaphor is all about.
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for joining us. I hope that this interview was a good burden for you, and I appreciate your time.
It was indeed. Thank you so much for having me.
That was Christina Crook, connecting via Skype. Now it's time for a short conversation about living responsibly on our planet, brought to you by Ora Wheat Organic Bread. Great taste that's sustainably baked. Chef and entrepreneur Trish Magwood also has a new book out. Hers is about bringing families together around the dining table. The book is a beautiful celebration of good, local, seasonal food and essential ingredients, the most essential being the people who come together over that food. Here's our chat. Trish, thanks very much for joining us. I wanted to start off by just trying to understand the motivation for doing the book the way you did it. I mean, it's very photocentric. They're beautiful photographs. What prompted that kind of approach to this book?
Thank you. Sonia did an amazing job with the photos. I'm so pleased that she could bring the vision and the concepts to life through the photos. And that was a big part of it. That I think that we eat with our eyes. And I think that the dirtiest vegetables fresh from the garden are the most beautiful things. And so I really wanted it to be a lookbook because it's such a simple cookbook and simple recipes. The photos are simply ideas. And that's where it came from. It's really a shared collection of recipes and photos that are meant to be visual and inspirational.
And you focus very much on the idea of a new table. And that's both obviously a physical table, but also a metaphorical table. And I'm interested in that because in this episode, we're talking about another metaphor about a ship and the body being a ship that moves through a life or moves through water. Metaphorically, when you talk about new table, tell me what you mean by that.
The table for me is really about gathering, and it's about connection and people, specifically family, but also friends and those we define as family. And so the table is more metaphorical for me. In our house, it's smack in the middle of the house, in the middle of the kitchen, so that it is literally the center and the central place that we gather around. And growing up, a meal was always the place and the time to connect. And it is still really, really important in our house. And it's something that we all, as we age and our kids become older, we hold really tight to it. And it's the excuse to bring people together.
So I want to talk a little bit about the family, because and your history, because you grew up on a farm. Your family was very focused on raising local food. And I think in Creemore, you've got a cabinet that used to be a chicken coop, right? So you're very, literally very connected to the farm and local. Is that really something that has just been a part of your life since the very beginning?
Certainly since my teens. So growing up, my grandparents were also in Creemore. And so we would spend our time with them there. So it's really all I know. And now all my kids know. For us, we just naturally prefer and gravitate to being outside. And my parents, when my dad retired, became what was supposed to be a hobby farmer and now sort of a full-fledged, full-time grower of many things, from, grapes to an apple orchard and beyond. And so it's the place that we all connect as a family outside, whether it's making apple cider or making maple syrup. I certainly don't profess to be an expert in any of those things, but it's what brings us together.
One of the things you talk about in the book is essentials. You talk about essential tools, essential ingredients for cooking. Can you touch a little bit on that, about what makes something essential for you?
To me, the essentials are having on hand the ingredients, the raw vegetables and fruits of the season. But in our pantry, so for our shelf-stable stuff, it's the things that we cook with on a daily basis. So having an assortment of salts. I like a Malden flake salt to finish a salad for crunch, and good cracked pepper as opposed to, shaken pepper. Having a couple of different oils and vinegars, whether it's coconut oil to cook at higher heat or your favorite extra virgin olive oil. I really cook quite simply. So there'll be some staples of some spices that I'll use. Like I love a curry blend, but I won't have all of the components that are required for a curry. And then, our grains and pastas, so things that I have on hand. And
I want to just wrap up by talking about ingredients in one particular recipe in the book called Mamma Mia Chicken, because it's such a family recipe. Can you talk a little bit about why you picked that and what you love about it?
To me, it just is like family in a big cast iron pan. And so there's something nurturing and comforting about, we talk about one dish meals, but it sort of has all those components of a Mediterranean dish. It's got capers and basil and tomatoes, and it's really quite simple. It's a take on a margherita pizza, actually. It's like a pizza chicken. And it's sort of sloppy and messy and informal, which is a big part of what a boisterous gathering should be all about. And it's really celebrating those basic ingredients that I think most people love.
Well, thank you very much for creating the book and for inviting us to your table today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
That was Trish Magwood, who spoke to me from her newly renovated Toronto home. So, here we are at the end of this episode of Harrowsmith Radio. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider subscribing to this podcast at Apple Podcasts or in your favorite podcast player. And please tell your friends and family. Got feedback? We'd love to hear it. You can email us at letters@harrowsmithmag.com. That URL, harrowsmithmag.com, is also where you can order subscriptions online. And you can find Harrowsmith Magazine on newsstands of selected stores across Canada. Until next time, for Harrowsmith Radio, I'm Wayne McPhail. And also, until next time, remember these 4 words: make, grow, sustain, share. Tune in for the next episode of Harrowsmith Radio.